If you told me a few years ago I'd ever call a coworker family, I would have laughed. I grew up in a house where love came with conditions and every favor got counted. So when I moved to Chicago after college and started over with nothing but a laptop and a stubborn need to prove myself, I promised I'd keep my circle small. I met Ethan at a co-working spot in the West Loop, the kind with cold brew on tap and people taking calls like they were on TV. I was building a small marketing firm, mostly local businesses, a few startups, whatever would pay on time. Ethan came over because he liked the logo on my screen. We talked for 5 minutes and somehow it turned into 2 hours. He had that easy confidence that made you feel like the world wasn't as heavy as it was. At first, he was just a referral guy. He'd bring clients, I'd deliver the work. But he kept showing up. He stayed late, helped me pitch, sat with me on the floor eating takeout when we were too tired to find chairs. When I got my first big contract, he was the one who said, "Let's build something real." He made it sound simple, like ordering a pizza. The truth is, I wanted to believe in someone. I wanted the kind of partnership you hear about, 2 people locked in, working hard, watching each other's backs. I started letting him handle things I hated, like negotiating, invoices, and paperwork. I told myself I was being smart by focusing on creative work and letting him handle the money side. My sister, Lila, loved him from the start. She lived in the suburbs with her husband, but she'd come into the city whenever she could, like it was a little adventure. She'd sit in our tiny office, swinging her legs on the chair, complimenting Ethan's ideas like he was already a celebrity. "He's good for you," she'd say, like she was proud of me for finally choosing the right people. Hearing that from her mattered more than I wanted to admit. Lila and I weren't close in the warm, best friends way. We were close in the way people are when they survived the same messy childhood and never talk about it. So when she looked me in the eye and told me Ethan was solid, it felt like a stamp of approval I didn't even know I needed. By the time we signed our partnership paperwork, I wasn't just thinking about business. I was thinking about loyalty. I was thinking about those late nights when Ethan talked about how he never had siblings and how lonely that felt. I remembered joking, "Congratulations, you just got one." He laughed, and I meant it. I didn't see the trap because it didn't feel like one. It felt like finally having something steady. The first time something felt off, it didn't look like a disaster. It looked like a minor headache. A client called me, annoyed, asking why we hadn't paid the photographer yet. I checked our project folder and saw the invoice sitting there, marked paid. Ethan said it was a processing delay, some bank issue, nothing serious. He was calm, almost bored by it, like I was asking if the printer had ink. Then another client mentioned a contract they were still waiting on. I searched my email and found nothing. Ethan said he'd handled it and must have sent it from his phone. He promised he'd forward it. He never did. But he talked so smoothly that I found myself nodding along anyway. I started waking up earlier, staring at the ceiling, doing mental math. Rent, payroll, subscriptions, taxes. I'd sit at my kitchen table with coffee that tasted like anxiety, scrolling through our banking app, trying to make sense of numbers that didn't line up the way they should. Lila noticed the stress before anyone else. She'd text me during the day, asking if I was eating, if I was sleeping. One Saturday, she drove in and insisted we get brunch. We sat in a crowded diner with loud music and even louder plates clattering in the kitchen. I tried to explain what was bothering me, missing invoices, late payments, the feeling that something was slipping. She waved her hand like I was talking about a bad hair day. "You're spiraling," she said. "Ethan's not like that. He wouldn't mess with you." I told her it wasn't about him being like that. It was about things not adding up. "Look," she said, lowering her voice, like she was being wise. "You've worked too hard to ruin this with paranoia. You finally have a good thing. Don't sabotage it." I didn't realize it then, but that word, sabotage, hooked into me. It made my doubt feel like a character flaw. Like if I questioned anything, I was the problem. So I stayed quiet. I avoided asking Ethan for full access to certain accounts because I didn't want to look controlling. I stopped bringing up issues in meetings because I didn't want to sound dramatic. I told myself trust meant giving someone room to fix mistakes. But the mistakes didn't get fixed. There were little moments that should have snapped me awake, Ethan snapping at the accountant on the phone, then apologizing with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan taking calls outside, pacing, lowering his voice when I walked into the hallway. Ethan suddenly pushing for bigger moves, more clients, bigger contracts, faster growth, like we were racing against some invisible clock. I tried to talk to him one night after we closed up. The office smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. The city lights outside the window made everything look prettier than it was. Can we review the accounts together? I asked. He gave me that warm, familiar grin. Of course. Tomorrow. You're just tired. Tomorrow became next week. And next week became the month everything broke. It happened on a Monday, the kind of gray Chicago morning where the wind feels personal. I got to the office early because I wanted to do something I hadn't done in weeks, check everything myself. Not because I wanted to accuse Ethan. Just because I needed to breathe. His name on my screen didn't show as online. That wasn't unusual. But when I called him, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message. I sent a text. Nothing. By late morning, my stomach felt like it was full of stones. I tried his email and got an automatic bounce back. It made no sense. He used that email for everything. We had clients attached to it. Documents. Contracts. I walked into the main room and froze. His desk was cleared out. Not messy cleared, like someone tidied up. Empty cleared, like he'd never existed. No laptop. No notebooks. No framed photo of his dog that used to sit next to the monitor. Even the little plant he insisted we needed for vibes was gone. My hand started shaking before my brain caught up. I opened our filing cabinet and saw gaps where folders should have been. I checked the locked drawer where we kept the original signed contracts. The lock was intact, but inside, several documents were missing. Like someone had planned this, knew exactly what to take. I sat down at my desk and logged into our banking dashboard. The balance showed a number so low my eyes refused to accept it at first. I refreshed the page like that would fix reality. Then I clicked into the transaction history and saw it, transfer after transfer, large amounts leaving the account over the last few days. Not one. Not two. A whole chain of them, like a trail disappearing into fog. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to climb out of my throat. I called the bank and stumbled through words, telling them something was wrong, that I didn't authorize these transfers. The person on the line sounded polite and tired, like they'd heard versions of my panic before. They told me they'd open a case. They told me to contact law enforcement. They told me, gently, that funds moved like this are often hard to recover. Hard to recover. Like I'd lost a coat, not a company. I didn't cry right away. I moved on autopilot, locking the office, sitting in my car with the heat blasting because my fingers were numb, staring at my steering wheel like it had answers. I drove home without really seeing the streets. My apartment felt too quiet, too normal for what had just happened. I paced my living room, then called the one person I thought would at least sound human. Lila, I said the second she answered, Ethan's gone. Like, gone. The accounts are empty. There was a pause. Not the shocked kind. Not the, what are you talking about, kind. Just, a pause. Then she sighed, like she was already exhausted by me. Okay, she said slowly. Calm down. You don't even know what's going on yet. My skin went cold. Do you know something? I asked. Another pause. Then a softer voice, almost careful. People leave sometimes, she said. It doesn't mean he stole from you. I stared at my wall, at the small cracks near the window I'd never bothered to fix. Lila, I said, the money is gone. I can see it. It's not a misunderstanding. She didn't rush to comfort me. She didn't swear she'd help. She didn't even sound angry on my behalf. She just said, don't do anything stupid. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. That was when something inside me shifted. Not all the way into anger yet, more like a door closing. A quiet realization that I wasn't talking to someone who was on my side. I ended the call and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. Outside, a siren went by, distant and casual, like the city didn't care what I'd lost. And I knew, in a way I couldn't explain, that Ethan wasn't the only person who had disappeared from my life. The truth didn't hit me all at once. It came in fragments, the way bad news usually does. A forwarded email from a client asking why they were suddenly being contacted by Ethan from a different address. A notice from our accountant asking why a new beneficiary had been added to one of the accounts. Small details that didn't make sense on their own but started forming a picture I didn't want to see. I spent days going through old messages, bank statements, shared folders. Every time I found something new, my chest tightened. Then I noticed the dates. Certain transfers happened on days I remembered clearly, days when Lila had come into the city, days when she'd insisted we all grab dinner, days when she'd been unusually quiet, watching Ethan more than talking. I called her and asked directly. No jokes, no soft tone. I asked her if she knew where Ethan was and if she knew what he had done. There was a long silence on the line, longer than before. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded flat. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. That sentence changed everything. I asked her what she meant, even though I already knew. She admitted that Ethan had told her weeks earlier that he was planning to leave. He said the business was unstable and that he needed to protect himself. According to her, he framed it like a smart exit, not a crime. She knew he was moving money. She knew he was setting things up in his favor. And she chose not to tell me. When I asked why, her answer was simple. He had offered her money. Not a huge amount compared to what he took from me, but enough to make her feel safe, enough to make her feel like she was choosing security over conflict. I didn't want to be in the middle, she said. You and Ethan were already stressed. I thought it was better not to interfere. I felt something heavy drop in my stomach. She watched everything unfold and decided silence was easier. She convinced herself that staying quiet wasn't betrayal, just self-preservation. I told her she had let me walk into a fire with my eyes closed. She didn't argue. She just repeated that she never asked him to hurt me, as if that made her hands clean. What hurt more than the silence was what came after. I expected regret. Maybe shame. Maybe even fear. Instead, Lila slowly turned the conversation toward me. She said I had always trusted people too easily. That I liked playing the hero, taking risks without thinking things through. She reminded me of other moments in my life when things didn't work out and suggested this was just another example of my poor judgment. It's not like Ethan forced you, she said. You gave him access. You let him run things. Her words felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in her head long before I ever asked the question. She talked about responsibility and lessons, about how this could be a turning point for me if I handled it maturely. I realized she was trying to rewrite the story. In her version, Ethan wasn't a thief. He was a consequence. And I wasn't a victim, I was the cause. When I told her I was going to report the fraud, she looked nervous for the first time. She asked if it was really necessary, if dragging this into court wouldn't just make everything worse. She warned me about legal fees, stress, embarrassment. That was the moment I understood what she was really afraid of. Not my pain. Not justice. Exposure. I stopped arguing. I didn't raise my voice. I just told her I wouldn't carry guilt that didn't belong to me. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. In a way, she didn't. The version of me who apologized for other people's mistakes was gone. Reporting Ethan felt surreal. Sitting in a small office, explaining my own life to strangers, answering questions about trust and signatures and decisions I wished I could undo. Every form I filled out felt like reopening a wound, but it also felt like taking something back. The process was slow. Painfully slow. Some days I wanted to give up, to accept the loss and disappear. But every time I thought about staying silent, I remembered how that silence had been used against me. I rebuilt carefully. Smaller projects. Clear boundaries. Written agreements that left no room for assumptions. I learned to ask uncomfortable questions and sit with uncomfortable answers. I stopped talking to Ethan completely. His absence became permanent, not dramatic. Just empty space where trust used to live. As for my sister, the distance grew naturally. There was no big goodbye, no final argument. Just fewer calls, then none. I realized that protecting myself didn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it meant choosing peace over explanation. I still think about what I lost. Not just money or a business, but a version of myself who believed loyalty was enough. That loss still hurts, but it doesn't control me. I know now that resilience isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. I trusted someone like a brother. I was betrayed by blood. And I survived both.